Hello and welcome to my channel. I don't actually know if I'm ready to film this video. Like, normally after I read a book or like while I'm reading a book, I'll write notes, and I've been very lax on it this past month, so hopefully we can get through this video without me stumbling too much on my thoughts. But anyway, we are currently in June, so that means it is time for our May monthly reading wrap up, and I read some really good things this month and I'm actually really excited to talk to you guys about them. The very first book that I read in May was Magnolia Parks, and I liked it. I ended up rating it 3.5 stars, and I do feel like it was a little lackluster in comparison to some of like the reviews, like the rave reviews people were giving it, and just kind of like in general, like the strong feelings. Like some people like really liked it, or I feel like people really didn't like it. I just thought it was decent. Like I definitely liked it. Like I'm gonna keep reading the series, but I wasn't like overwhelmed either way. Basically, Magnolia Parks is about, I almost said Chuck and Blair. What are their names? I don't have the book in front of me. I really need to get my bookshelves up because having them in piles on the floor is becoming very inconvenient. Where is my book? I don't have the book with me, but it's basically about Magnolia and a guy. BJ? Is his name BJ? I think it's BJ. Anyway, it's basically about those two characters and their kind of like on and off again relationship, and just like the toxicness of them together, which if I remember correctly, I don't think that the problems that they had were anything too crazy. The main thing is just like the miscommunication, which that's really the only trope that I find myself like getting frustrated while I'm reading. It's such like an easy thing to fix. You just need to talk. But that being said, with this book in particular, it didn't really bother me because I watched so many videos of people talking about this book beforehand, and literally every single one of them were talking about how toxic it was. So I kind of just went into this book expecting the worst and was just along for the ride. But I also will say, because of everything that everyone was saying, it wasn't nearly as bad as I was expecting. I don't know. I just feel like they just don't communicate, and that's really it. Usually when things get like super hyped up, I end up getting disappointed. But in this particular instance, because everyone was hyping it up in kind of like the opposite way, I was pleasantly surprised. Also, I was kind of surprised that this is not a spicy book. Like I was expecting it to be spicy for some reason, and there is like absolutely no spice. That's not a bad thing, it's just something I thought I would point out because I went into it thinking that they were gonna be spicy. Also on that same note, there really wasn't any kind of like tension or butterflies or anything. Like I didn't get any kind of like feels about their relationship. So basically this book is like a combination of all of the things that I typically don't like in romance novels. It's got my least favorite trope in it. There's no tension, no butterflies. There's not like a big plot to the story. It's literally just about these two people and a little bit about their friends. But the author somehow made it a very enjoyable book, and I'm excited to get to the next one. That being said though, honestly, the only thing that actually like irked me and was upsetting after I finished the first book, I was really excited to get the next book and read that. And I still have not done it yet because it's not about Magnolia. Apparently it's Magnolia Daisy, Magnolia Daisy. I'm very tempted to just go straight to the third book so that I can continue Magnolia's story and then circle back to the second one and then the fourth. So if you have actually read the whole series, is it okay if I flip-flop around? Is there information in the second book that I absolutely need for the third one? Let me know. Moving on to our next set of books, because we have a series to talk about, The Vicious Lost Boys, and this is basically a Peter Pan retelling, but like super spicy, smutty retellings, and boy, did I enjoy them. Literally the only thing I didn't really care for in this series was the smut itself, just because it was like pretty crazy. Basically the general idea of this story is that Peter Pan lost his shadow, and he basically kidnaps the Darling women when they turn 18 so that they can help him retrieve his shadow, because he feels like they somehow know where it is. And the first book basically starts with Peter Pan kidnapping Winnie, which is Wendy's great-great-granddaughter, and then the majority of the rest of the story of the first book is Peter Pan, Winnie, and 3 of the Lost Boys trying to find Peter Pan's shadow. I did talk in more detail about these books in a recent video that I uploaded. I did a Battle of the Books Spicy Peter Pan edition, so if you want more detail about them, go ahead and watch that video. I also read Hooked, and I can't remember what it's called. It's a Katie Roberts book. Kind of like circling back to the smut, one of the reasons it was a little like shocking to me at first was because not only does Winnie have relations with Peter Pan, but she also has them with all 3 of the Lost Boys. That being said, the actual relationship between the 5 people I really liked reading about and was very intriguing to me. Like I don't know, it was just like a weird combination of like super intense, crazy smut and this like sweet found family aspect, and it was just so weird, but I loved it. If you're into smut, I highly recommend that series. I really, really enjoyed it. Another series that I read this month that I absolutely fell head over heels in love with was The Cruel Prince. I checked those out from the library just kind of like randomly in the beginning of the month, not actually thinking that I would have the time to read them, and I literally ended up reading all 3 books within 2 days. They were so good, and again, I read them in the beginning of the month and I still think about those books. Like, I miss them, I miss the characters, I want more of that story. I feel like people talk about The Cruel Prince as being like a fantasy romance, but I really wouldn't categorize it as a romance. I feel like it's a little misleading because essentially the book is about Jude and Carradine. Jude is a human, like a normal person, but she's been raised with fairies, and then Carradine is a fairy prince, and they go to school together, and he's like always tormenting her and things like that. And just kind of like fairies in general don't typically like humans, so everyone kind of like picks on Jude, but especially Carradine. So I feel like a lot of people review this book as kind of like an enemies to lovers kind of story, and that's actually why I ended up picking it up from the library, is because I saw someone's video where they said that it was a true enemies to lovers, which I do agree with the fact that like they are definitely enemies for a very long time. It takes them, I think, almost the entire first book before they even like consider being anything but enemies. But like that's definitely not the point of the book at all. The series is definitely more so about Jude and like her struggles of being a human in this fairy land and all the crazy things that are happening and stuff like that. Like the romance is such like a teeny tiny, barely even there kind of thing. I feel like this series specifically is kind of what made me realize that the fantasy part is what I prefer in fantasy romance, not necessarily the romance, because I actually kind of enjoyed the book more, I think, because the focus wasn't on the romance and you actually got more details about everything else that's going on, and it was just so freaking good. Overall for the series, 5-star read. Loved it. Oh, which reminds me, I didn't do a star rating for The Vicious Boys. I think I would give that like a 4-star rating. I really love the story, like I said, but the smut kind of like was just not my thing. I read a Katie Roberts book right after I read the Cruel Prince trilogy, but we're gonna skip over that one for now because I wanted to talk about the series that I just finished. It's another like fantasy romance trilogy, which reminded me a lot of the Cruel Prince trilogy. Again, it kind of had like an air of romance to it, but the romance wasn't the point of the story. But the first book in that series is called A Curse So Dark and Lonely, I believe. And I don't remember the author, but I'll have all 3 of the books from the trilogy on the screen so you can see them. This was a series that I started off of the recommendation of a friend of mine, and it's basically a Beauty and the Beast retelling, which I loved. Basically, the first book is about Wren and Harper. Wren is the beast in this story, and Harper would be, I guess, Belle. The way that the story is kind of presented is that there's kind of like 2 parallel universes. One where Wren lives, it's kind of like that old royalty castle, medieval type of vibe. And then where Harper lives is kind of like modern day times. And basically, Harper gets kidnapped by Gray, who is Wren's commander, and brought back to their universe so that she can fall in love with Wren and break the curse. But the series as a whole ends up being so much more than that, and the way that the author kind of like wrote and presented the series was kind of interesting. So the first book, like I said, mostly focused on Wren and Harper, and then the second book focused on Gray and a new character that we meet, and then the third book kind of combines everybody together again. So it's such like a cool way of reading. Although I will say by the end of the third book, I didn't really like the direction that the author took with Wren's character. Gray was basically my favorite character in the first book, so I did like the fact that he got his own kind of like book essentially, but I just kind of feel like as the trilogy progressed, Wren and Harper were kind of like shoved to the side and they're definitely involved in the rest of the series, but the part of them that you got from that first one is kind of gone, and I don't know if I'm saying too much or not making any sense because I'm not saying enough. Who knows? At the end of the day, I ended up giving that series like 4 stars. So a little bit less than The Cruel Prince. I definitely like that one more, but they're both still really good. And yeah, I just love me some fantasy. Like literally, that's all I want to read. And then last but not least, for our May reading, I did read Learn My Lesson by Katie Roberts. I feel like a broken record. I have talked about this series so many times. I feel like I've said the same thing every single time. But just in case this is the first video you've seen of mine and you've never heard of the Wicked Villain series, these are basically a series of super smutty books that are very loosely inspired by Disney movies, and each book in the series is inspired by a different movie, but they're all within the same universe, so you do see characters from other books kind of like pop in here and there. And this book, Learn My Lesson, is actually Hades and Meg's story, and those two basically own the Underworld, which is an adult club. And within the series as a whole, the Underworld is considered like neutral territory. So every book that I've read so far has involved the Underworld in some kind of capacity. So we've seen those two characters in every single book so far as well. And if you have seen my other videos where I talked about these books, you know that they're not really my favorite. The smut originally was not something that I liked, but it has definitely grown on me. All that being said, this book was definitely a lot different than I thought it was gonna be, especially because I believe the synopsis for this book basically was talking about how like Meg is the queen to Hades' king, and essentially what this book is about is the problems between Hades and Meg, like the tension between them. And I don't mean sexual tension or romantic tension, I mean just like they're drifting apart and they don't know why. Basically this whole book is them trying to like figure out how to kind of like reconnect, and essentially they bring in Hercules to help them do that. I actually ended up really liking this one. This was definitely my favorite out of all of them, and I ended up giving it a 3.5 stars. So every single one of the books has gotten a different star rating. We have a 2, 2.5, 3, and now 3.5 star. So here's to hoping, crossing my fingers, that they just keep getting better and better, which I do feel like they probably will at least stay at a 3.5. I don't think they'll drop lower than that, because I know what I'm getting into with these books now, and I'm starting to kind of like enjoy them more. And now again, I'm getting more invested in the story. So I have already started The Beast, which is the 5th book in the series, and then the last one, I don't remember what that's called. It's something about roses, and I think it's like Sleeping Beauty. So crossing my fingers that I can get a hold of that this month. Anyway, that is all of the books that I read in May. It doesn't seem like I talked about that many, but the majority of them were series. Like I had 2 trilogies and then a 4-book series and then a couple extra ones. That's actually a lot of books. How many is that? 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 books. I think that's the most I've done so far. I think that's everything that I have to say. I'm gonna go ahead and go because the lighting is just getting worse and worse throughout this entire video. I've been trying to ignore it, but we're basically in the dark now, so I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you have had the most amazing of days, and I will hopefully see you guys in my next one. Bye!